I have long striven to be that impactful, that effective.
I have a dream too, and I no, seriously, that's his eloquence, and his eloquence contributed to his relevance.
Yes.
And I was listening to a book on communication and talking about the "I have a dream" speech, and how he wasn't getting the response from the audience initially, and apparently Mahalia Jackson yelled over to him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And that's when he riffed the "I have a dream." That was not as written as it was in the script.
I think some of his greatest speeches were the result of those planning meetings.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
And for those things that matter, I remember after you and I gave the presentation on perspective.
Long Beach?
Yes.
San Diego, San Diego.
In San Diego. One of the audience came up and was very complimentary, and then said, "So what can I do? What would you recommend I focus on?" And my response was, whatever you value the most. We should not be perplexed or overwhelmed by the number of issues that we can address. We should address those 2 or 3 issues. I chose education for a number of reasons. I'm not sure it was a political decision. It was more of a professional decision for me. And in the process, I discovered the political ramifications of my choice. And I was better prepared to address those issues as an academician.
My problem is there are so many things that I want to know and learn about and everything else that I've almost too spread out.
Well, don't get me wrong. I have other interests too.
No, I know.
But it doesn't mean, but you have to focus somewhere in order to have an impact. I have to tell you, when I moved to California and voted the first time, I hated the proposition, the
number of propositions.
The number of propositions. I was like, my God, my first vote when I went to the poll, I was ill prepared. I probably stayed at the poll for half an hour because I was trying to figure out what these propositions were. I didn't understand. Now I vote by mail because I spend a week before I send in my vote. I spent a week going through the propositions, looking at both sides, the pros and the cons, before I vote one way or another. And I don't care about half of them until I read them.
And I would bet that the vast majority of voters don't even vote on the propositions because they are too daunting to wade through. So they will vote for the candidates whose names that they have seen or who they relate to. But when you look at the number of total votes for the propositions and the bills, they're nowhere near what the total votes are for the political parties.
I know.
So
on the other hand,
yes,
I have learned to appreciate the opportunity to have a citizen-generated proposition for consideration. I've also have developed a cultivated fear about that same opportunity, because I see some people putting up propositions that have potential budgetary impact without consideration of that impact.
Let me ask you a personal question. Do you think your interest in the propositions, in the bills, in reading the Supreme Court rulings comes from having grown up during civil rights times and having watched the transition from 2/5, 3/5 to a full person, from not being able to vote to being able to vote? Do you think that foundational experience growing up then and through those challenges has given you the impetus to be more involved versus maybe your kids who've had it a little bit different?
No doubt. But I will also tell you that I have generational colleagues that don't. And they
White?
went through, no, Black,
Okay.
that went through the same experiences and did not glean the same lessons or appreciation. They appreciated the same rewards and the same changes, but for whatever reason, politics is ethereal to them, and they may only participate when they vote. They may not even vote. I don't know that, but I do know that I have a number of classmates that are not as informed, that they depend on their city council member to determine their positions, or they just accept what the state legislature decides and talk about how bad things are, or they just boil their water and don't know how to hold people accountable for the taxes that they're paying.
So you have made a concerted effort and a defined decision to be involved and to be one who is an influencer versus to be less involved and one who is influenced.
Yes, you could say that.
Okay. Which is probably why you and I are having these conversations.
Probably. Yes, you're right. Otherwise, I wouldn't give you the time of day. I wouldn't know. First of all, I wouldn't know enough to talk about it. I will tell you this. I was influenced by Martin Luther King. I think a lot of people admired him. I was influenced by him. I was influenced by his savviness, by his analytical precision. I just recently heard him just off the cuff. He was in a planning meeting and he was talking and he mentioned, oh, I know what it was. I was watching a recent a present day activist who had a film clip of him in a planning meeting. And he was explaining, he was in a church and he was explaining to the people in the pews about the false argument of reparations that people have against reparations. In about a minute, he encapsulated the injustices of the surrounding the lack of recognition of forced labor that wasn't paid for and the wealth that forced labor generated, and the consistent laws that were passed to protect that wealth and to expand that wealth, and how every time we talk about reparations, it usually begins with the failed promise of 40 acres and a mule after we abolish slavery. And the inference, even that was an example of how African Americans are always looking for a handout and looking for the government to pull them up to, when it was the government essentially that enslaved us. That was law. It was the government that fed us as long as we worked for nothing else. And they couldn't pay us back for the decades of work that we provided for nothing but a meal and housing, while at the same time, there was a land grab in Oklahoma. Land was given freely after they took it from the Indians to the rest of the country, to the rest of the citizenry. Then after they gave the land, we then gave them subsidies to farm the land. And after we gave them subsidies to establish farm monopolies, we then gave them subsidies not to farm so that we could maintain a living price, a living wage, if you will, for those same people. And yet we have to unionize now to get a living wage. He so eloquently pointed out the disparities and the psychological tactics that are used to make us question our own values, our own selves, and reset our views about governmental policies. I have long striven to be that impactful, that effective.
I have a dream too. And I, no, seriously, that's his eloquence, and his eloquence contributed to his relevance.
Yes.
And I was listening to a book on communication and talking about the I Have a Dream speech, and how he wasn't getting the response from the audience initially. And apparently Mahalia Jackson yelled over to him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And that's when he riffed the I Have a Dream. That was not as written as it was in the script.
I think some of his greatest speeches were the result of those planning meetings. I think he unintentionally practiced them several times over. And by the time he got to large crowds, he had tightened it up to the point that he could get over complicated concepts in very simplistic language, but not too simplistic. The other thing that I admired about him was, and I'm paraphrasing here, somebody said something about, when he speaks, he understands that the average American only had an 8th grade education. And his response was, they also have dictionaries.
So as we try to wrap up this conversation, which has gone in a variety of different directions, but I think ending with Martin Luther King is always a great place to end. I have to ask another question.
I thought we were ending.
Yes, we're going to end on a message for the audience. Which Martin Luther King biography or autobiography is best to read or listen to?
I don't have the answer to that. I have not read any of Dr. King's biography. However, I intend to read the latest one that just came out.
Okay.
And I think it's called, let me see if I can find it.
I think we need to do this more often, give assignments to our listeners and see if anybody actually is paying attention.
Yes, but there's a recent one that's out called The Life, I think. And it's a biography of Dr. Martin Luther King, and it brings in, it just came out about a month ago.
Here's some dead air to edit, Nicole.
Yeah.
King, The Life of Martin Luther King.
Yes, King, A Life. That's it. King, A Life.
Yeah, the author is Johnathan E.I.G. All right, I will add that to my list. Cool. So, ladies and gentlemen, read about Martin Luther King.
As much as I idolize him, because I grew up under him, one of the reasons I've never read his biographies is because I feel as if I lived his life while he was living it. I shared his life. He was in my living room almost every day, and I attended a couple of meetings where he was there when he'd come to the South. He and Medgar Evers were principals in my life. I've never read a biography about my father either. Of course, no one's ever written one, but
isn't that what you're working on now?
No, I'm working on an autobiography now, believe it or not.
Well, the first couple of chapters, don't forget the parents. Somehow you had to be conceived.
Stay out of my outline.
You know what's disappointing is that this King book is shorter than the Affordable Care Act.
Well, the reason I'm interested in this book is because apparently he did some really good research, and he brings in some notes and tapes between he and Lyndon Johnson that were heretofore unknown, and other relationships. He also has unclassified notes from J. Edgar Hoover.
There's a surprise.
That adds to the story of the weaponization of the FBI. One day we will talk about the 2-tier system of justice.
All right, so we were trying to wrap things up when I asked you a question, and somehow we got.
I know. I understand. I tried to warn you. I really did. And
well, by the way, the author of this book has to be great because he also wrote a biography of Muhammad Ali, which now is going to be on my list, and a biography of Lou Gehrig. So now I've got 3 books that are all about 600 pages or plus to try to figure out where to read and when to figure them into my schedule. But I will put the Martin Luther King book definitely up on the list, probably ahead of the Keith Richards book that I was going to read next. So I would rather read about the history of Martin Luther King than the Rolling Stones, at least for the moment. Now I know what to send you for your birthday.
You can wait that long? How about let's see, Father's Day just went by. Gee, I can't. How about 4th of July? No, I'm just.
Well, Christmas is coming. In fact, if Sharon is correct, I think she's downstairs watching QVC for Christmas in July.
Is she?
Yes, she's all ready for that. I don't know. I think she asked. Oh, she asked. We were walking the dog this morning, and we do have to wrap this up. We were walking the dog this morning. We were walking the dog this morning, and she said, "Are we going to do dragons or skeletons for Halloween?" And I said, "It's freaking July 1st. She said, "I know, but that's the second half of the year, so we can start talking about it now." So the important things in life, Phil, skeletons or dragons.
Tell Sharon I love her. I love her forward thinking. I really do. I'm impressed with her with her ability to plan.
Well, we should plan dinners as well as we plan our Halloween costumes and decorations.
Yeah, right. We sure should.
You know, talking about planning dinners, you know what time it is?
Yeah, I have some watermelon.
Okay, well, I got some peanut butter and jelly. Thank you for the peanut butter. And it's waiting for me. And thank you to all our listeners. Sometime you'll join us for lunch. We'll do a virtual lunch and learn with Phil and Peter. Hey, good to see you. To our listeners, thank you very much. And to Nationwide, we appreciate it and your support.
Hear, hear.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.